I want to talk about this because when we do this religion thing, we often hear about it as a way to cultivate the inner light. And I want to talk about the outer light for a moment, because we need the outer light as much as the inner light. And in fact, my message is you can't find the inner light unless you go in search of the outer light. That is, until you go and search for something you don't have, you have no idea where it lies, even if it is within you. And that's important. Because we have a kind of spiritualized liberal religion that says if we just sit here comfortably and serenely and listen to the music and ponder, the inner light will come free and we will be illuminated from within. It's a beautiful notion. But I want to say that unless you go in search of it, it won't happen on its own. You have to go looking for it. And you always look outside yourselves. And of course, that's what people do when they get into religion. They read a Bible, a book, they go to a church or a house of worship, looking for something that will give them a sense of purpose or meaning. And only later, if they're very fortunate, will they discover the thing they're searching for was always living within them anyway. But you couldn't have found it in the first place. It reminds me of a story. I've told it here before, and I'll make very quick work of it, about the old poor man who went to bed one night praying to whatever God was important to him. "We are such poor people," he said, "my family and I barely have enough to eat for one day, our clothes, our rags. Could you not, splendid one, show us a path to help us survive?" And he went to bed that night, and as so often happens in folk tales, a dream revealed to him something. In this case, he saw a bridge in a far city, a city he'd heard about and he knew about, and that if he crossed that bridge, underneath of the bridge, underneath of the pilings, there would be a treasure of gold. And so he set out for the bridge and went over miles and miles and begged his way over the distance to get there. And he finally gets there after days and days, and he finds the bridge, and he's looking around to make sure no one sees him, trying to dig up the gold lest it be stolen from him. He looks around, and just as he's looking for it, a police officer says, "You, sir, what are you doing here?" And of course, a poor man has no place anywhere in the world of those days, and a police officer can always challenge. And he said, "Officer, this is going to sound very silly, but I had a dream a month ago, and I set out to find out if it's true that underneath this bridge is buried a treasure that I've come to find. And if you help me dig for it, I'll share it with you." The officer said, "Yeah, sir, you are mistaken. I was here when they built this bridge. Your dream is nonsense. Why, if people went chasing after every dream, they would lose their lives wandering about. Well, just the other day, I had a dream that in a village far from here I've never heard of, in a little house so poor no one in it had enough to eat, that under the floorboards there was a stack of gold. And what would I be if I were to leave my life and go and try to find that village?" And suddenly the man said, "Thank you. I must return home." And he trudged back over the days and made his way back faster than he came, and went to his own house and tore up the boards, and there was a stack of gold coins, enough to keep his family fed. Now, this is a wonderful story about how your dreams can come true, but you'll notice the man's dream did not come true. The other man's dream that he did not believe came true. And my point again is that when we look for what we know is within us, we first must step away from who we are. We all have to be Moses at some moment and go in search of a distant fire. We all have to take the long journey. It might be costly. In the Christian reading today is a passage from Philippians in which Paul says to them, "Work out your own salvation in fear and trembling." That's what he means. That the journey of wholeness is a journey with fear and trembling. Because when we follow our light, the one that we think we're going to find, we have to get up and leave. We have to leave our homes, our familiar circumstances. How many of us actually do that? How many of us are willing to put our lives at risk, to take the terrible dangers in hand, to see the police officer, to go to a foreign land, wherever that is, figuratively or how many of us are willing to undergo the fear and trembling it takes to find the distant fire, and then find out when you get there it was just a fire? And then if you're lucky, to have someone say, no, where you came from, that's where it lies. I want to tell you about a woman named Sunitha. She lives in India. This is just accidental. India's a big country. You can bump into them all the time. Sunitha was among those who were the fortunate who went to college and graduate school. She remembers when she was in kindergarten that right after her kindergarten class, she took her slate and went to find the poor children who lived around the corner and teach them what she had just been taught because they couldn't afford to go to school. And so she decided her mission in life was to teach the poor because they didn't have the ability to go to school. But unfortunately, in India, there are people who like people not only to stay poor, but to stay ignorant, and so she was pressured not to do this. She was pressured so much that at one point, a gang of men decided to get rid of her. They didn't kill her. They just raped her instead. And of course, when that happens, you feel so ashamed, and in that culture, you are spoiled, as it were. And the thing that one does, of course, or they expected, at least the young men, they expected, was that she would either kill herself or take herself and become a prostitute, which is the only other thing one can do once one has lost one's honor in those ways.